Hi, Doug Bassett from Stormwind, and today we're going to be talking about optimizing your time to live. As you know, there's all sorts of things that can affect how your network traffic is going to operate. And one of the things that we need to do is we need to worry about caching of our information. Now, what does this caching mean? Anytime I have a server that goes through and queries another DNS server, that information is going to be cached in a value called the time to live. Now, the nice thing about it is that this time to live is controlled by the server that hands out the information. So when you go to Microsoft.com, it's Microsoft.com server that says, well, I want you to remember this for an hour. If you go to Stormwind.com, Stormwind.com is going to say, hey, I want you to remember this for an hour, 2 hours, whatever. And any machine that has gone through and dealt with that query is going to find, okay, we have this information. I don't have to look it up for another hour because we just resolved it. So what's the big deal with TTL? Well, the whole idea of TTL is to make sure that you set the appropriate value. And what we're talking about here is, do you have a very dynamic environment, or is your environment sort of static? If you have a dynamic environment where it changes a lot, you're going to want to have a shorter TTL, because if I go from 10.1 to 10.2 and you gave me a 3-hour TTL, I'm not going to know for 3 hours that's been modified, and so I'm going to be hitting against a blank IP address. You also need to figure out what your optimal outage time is. Now, of course, I know optimal outage time is no outage. However, when you're going through and you have a web server and your web server falls over and I need to redirect traffic to another web server, people have already resolved that IP address. So maybe I need to be able to point this to another machine for a while so that I can go in and repair it. If I have a really long TTL, that's not going to help out. Maybe I need to shorten that up a little bit so that people will come in and communicate. But what about losing the actual DNS server? Well, in that case, a long TTL would be the way to go, because if this machine falls over and dies, and this happens to be our DNS server, we're kind of a shoestring company running this on a laptop, but if that machine goes out, people are not going to be able to resolve it. Of course, you should have a couple of DNS servers that are out there. But really, the number one reason for modifying your TTL is to help control the amount of traffic. If you have a DNS server and it's just constantly getting beat to death because so many people are coming up and querying it, what you may want to do is you may want to go in and have a longer TTL. Because remember, anybody that queries that machine, they're going to know, oh, okay, this is we've already resolved that. I don't have to go through and resolve it again because I've pulled the stuff in and I have it in memory. So how do we go through and modify the TTL? Well, you're going to do this in your DNS console. And this is set actually record by record, but you can set it for the entire zone by modifying what's called the start of authority. So I'm going to open up the properties here. And inside of our properties, we're going to have a tab that says start of authority. Now, when I'm looking at this, I have a couple of things that are in my environment. Number one, I have a serial number. This serial number is what's pretty much a change number. Anytime I have a modification, I have other DNS servers, they're going to go in and they're going to query that change to see if we've had any modifications in our environment at all. Then we have primary servers and who's responsible, who do I contact, some other stuff. But the TTL is set right here. This is the default TTL for all the records. And by default, it is set for 1 hour. That means that if you query a record, you're not going to come back and ask me for an hour for that to expire. Now, I can drop this down and I can say, hey, I want to do it for an hour, for minutes, for seconds, for days. And if you have a very static environment, 20 days, 30 days may be fine. One time when you may want to go through and change your time to live is if you're swapping out internet service providers. Now, let's say that I have a 30-day time to live. Of course, from the time I decide to change, it's going to take me 30 days to make that modification. And this brings a very important point. If you have a fight with your internet service provider and you throw up your hands, I'm never going to deal with them again, don't burn your bridges. Because what's going to happen is that you need to have time for your DNS changes to propagate throughout the environment, but you also need to make sure that these changes are going to be, clear out what's in the cache and be replaced. So if you have a 30-day TTL, the soonest that you're going to be able to have that new IP address provided by the new internet service provider is going to be 30 days. Even if you rush in and make that change to your records, it still has to deal with the people who have cached it up. So probably when you're taking the exam, the big thing to remember is you want to look at the amount of traffic. If you have a large TTL, big number, your traffic is going to diminish. If you have a small TTL, your traffic is going to increase. So they're inversely proportional. More traffic, smaller TTL. Less traffic, higher TTL. And again, like I said, if you're planning on taking this exam, this is definitely some information that you want to be aware of. So when you're optimizing your DNS server, just like everything that we're dealing with, you want to make informed decisions, make changes based upon business needs, and control that TTL so that you can balance traffic with freshness of information.